If you're doing web or mobile layouts, you'll have need for guides. So we're going to start with View and Rulers to bring up rulers so that we can add guides to the page. And you'll notice my ruler is defaulting to inches. If I'm doing a web mockup or even devices and mobile, I probably want to be in pixels. So I'm going to right-click anywhere on the ruler and choose pixels. I've decided that I'd like my inset from the left on this web page to be at about 20 pixels. And you'll notice the rich cursors popping up to let me know where this guide is landing. However, I'm zoomed too far out to get exactly to 20, so I'm going to let go and hit Command plus or Control plus to zoom in. I can hold down my space bar and click and drag over and down. And now I can move this guide and I should be able to get dead on 20 pixels. I'm going to start with the OLI logo and I'll just drag that over and it should snap to the guides automatically. Under the View menu is Snap. And for the Snap To settings, you could choose whether it snaps to your guides, to other layers, to the document bounds. And I don't have grids or slices showing, so that's why they're grayed out. Now, in this document, I have tons of layers. So if I double-click the word Color and double-click the word Adjustments, it can be difficult to manage. I like to leave big stuff like the logo and this main image. I'll hit Command 0 or Control 0 so you can see it. I like to leave those at the top where they're easy to get to. I'll click the eye icon to see that this is part of the top navigation. So let's make a folder group. The little folder icon at the bottom will create a new folder group. And I'll double-click to give it a name and call it Top Nav for navigation. I'm going to put that below the big image and other content, and I'm just watching that I see a thicker gray line when I let go so I know where it goes. So this is the navigation, this is the red bar, and I will click and hold down Shift and click on red bar to select both. And then I'll drag and drop them into Top Nav, and now I can collapse it to make it easier to see. I'll notice that the search is also off of my guide, so I'm going to zoom back in, and this time I'll hold down Command spacebar or Control spacebar to do a scrubby zoom. Now this scrubby or dynamic zoom will only work if you have an accelerated video card. If you don't, you might be getting a marquee zoom, where if you hold down Control and spacebar together or Command and spacebar together, you can click and drag to zoom into an exact area. So I already have the search piece loaded into folders, and I'll go back to my Move tool and I'll just drag this over until it snaps to my 20 pixel guide. I'll do the same with questions. Great. And it does show me the distance that I moved it originally. But if I'm concerned that I let go a hair off, I could select both search and questions and use the Align left edges on the options bar across the top of the screen. If I zoom out with Command minus or Control minus, I think I want to put these two folders in another group called Left Nav. So I'll make another new folder group. I call it folder group because they look like folders, but they're technically just called groups. And we'll call this Left Nav. I'll click on Search, hold down Shift and click on Questions and drag them in, so now that can be collapsed. And if I hit Command 0 or Control 0, I could see I've got the Illustrator icon, InDesign icon, and Photoshop icon kind of loose. They aren't in New Classes or Most Popular or Power User. So that's handy because right now I could select all three with click and shift click. You don't need to hold down Shift and click here, then here. If one item is selected, holding down Shift grabs everything in between when you click again. But I only want these three, so I will do click, shift click, and I'll use the Align Centers. And now they're all perfectly centered. And now I'll put them in the folder where they belong. So this will go with New Classes, InDesign will go with Most Popular, and Photoshop will go with Power User. And let's clean this even further by making another new folder group. and we'll call this right nav. Nothing drives me more nuts than seeing unnamed groups or background copy 1, background copy 2, layer copy 1, layer copy 2. I realize they make medication for that, but I just like to name my Photoshop layers and layer groups so that anyone who opens my file can understand what it's supposed to be. So I'll select these two with Shift and drag them into right nav, and I'll select Power User and drag it into right nav. And let's make sure I spell right correctly. And I'm curious about what this is, so I'll click the eye icon. That's the paragraph below Power User, so I'll drag it in with Power User. Finally, I'll collapse right nav, and I have a right bar, and that probably should be in with a right nav. So I'll drag that in. And I may need to double check the stacking order of that, whether I want this right bar above everything. You'll see the stroke and the fill come forward. I do not. So I'll undo with Command Z or Control Z. It did land properly at the bottom of the layer stack. And then I have these three main pieces, which are already in a folder. So I will expand them. And if they're in a folder and I want to make sure that these three main always move together, I can actually link them. So whenever I pick up one, they all move. But before I do that, I'm going to use my Shift key to select all three. And I will try the Distribute Horizontal Centers. Now the distance from here to here and here to here is perfect. And I'll align the top edges. And that worked perfectly also. But group training looks a little bit off from national accounts, so I'm going to click on left main and just use my right arrow key on my keyboard to nudge that in until it looks visually aligned with the body paragraph above. Then I'll Shift click to select all three and distribute them by their centers one more time. And I think I'll use my down arrow key to just visually nudge these down a bit. And if I want them always to pick up and move together or align together, I can link them. So this way, if I'm on another layer, I actually love to turn on Auto Select. That way, if I click on AI, it knows to move that group. I'll undo that. If I click on these three linked layers, it moves them, but they're part of three main, that folder group. So I'm going to undo and say Auto Select the layer, not the group. Now I can move AI by itself. I'll undo. I can move the photo for national accounts by itself. So that's the difference between selecting the group, the entire folder, or just an individual layer. Finally, I'm going to select left, middle, and right main with my Shift key and hold down Command on the Mac or Control on Windows to select the main background, and I will center those to one another. But in this case, these three need to be one group, and main background shouldn't be part of it to center to one another. So I'm going to take the paragraph here and the main background with the Command key and drag them up above 3 main. Make sure you aren't here where you see a white outline around 3 main, but you see a thicker white line above 3 main, and it places them above. Command clicking if I hit the icon also makes a selection, so I'll just deselect. And now I can collapse 3 main and drag it above so they're back on top. Finally, if I have 3 main selected and I hold down Command and click on the words main background, I should be able to center these to one another. And I have roughly a perfect layout. You could add other guides. You could lock them down so that they don't move to one another. They're really helpful in lining up individual pieces. But that's our tour of creating folder groups. And they're not called folder groups, they're just called groups or layer groups, but I call them folder groups because they look like folders. Setting up guides, right-clicking to change your unit of measure, and using the options bar while on the Move tool to align objects.